It was September 2018, and I vividly remember watching Christine Blasey Ford testify against Brett Kavanaugh. I remember how my body reacted as I watched. I remember the emotion in Dr. Ford's voice as she recounted the horrific things that Kavanaugh did to her. I remember that Dr. Ford stated in her testimony, "I am here today not because I want to be. I am terrified. I am here because I believe it is my civic duty to tell you what happened to me while Brett Kavanaugh and I were in high school." Dr. Ford shared her most traumatic memories, and I remember my 14-year-old self being moved to tears as I watched her. I watched this all unfold with my childhood best friend since kindergarten, Gracie. Both her and I shared the same sentiment, that we both believed Dr. Ford, and we couldn't imagine how scared Dr. Ford must have been to stand there and testify as Kavanaugh, her assaulter, stood there watching her. And I also remember how badly I wanted to punch Brett Kavanaugh in his smug little face as he spoke. I still feel that way. Most tragic of all, I remember how devastated both Gracie and I were as Brett Kavanaugh was confirmed to be a judge. This case and this moment was when I first became aware of the MeToo movement. And Dr. Ford's bravery has stuck with me ever since. This moment wasn't the moment I became a feminist. I think I've been a feminist since day one. Having lesbian mothers will do that to you. And obviously this case and this moment was not the actual moment that the MeToo movement began. The movement had a resurgence around 2016 when Donald Trump was elected president for the first time. However, the MeToo movement was actually founded by Tarana Burke in 2006. Tarana is a woman of color and a survivor and an activist. And despite founding MeToo, I didn't know her name until very recently. This is despite the fact that I've been engaging in the feminist community since I was born. Unfortunately, the MeToo movement has been co-opted by white women feminists seemingly ignore the women of color who actually started the movement. This phenomenon of white women feminists taking credit or ignoring the work of women of color feminists has existed since the days of the suffragettes. I would like to clarify that I'm specifically referring to feminism in the US here. For decades, feminism has been critiqued for historically ignoring women of color and their voices, and the Me Too movement is just one example of this issue. My name is Ella Orchard-Blowen, and in this video essay, I will be exploring the impact of the Me Too movement and how this movement that was founded by a woman of color became overrun with the voices of white women feminists. The impact of the Me Too movement is broad. That is why I will be narrowing in on discussing how the movement has impacted the voices of women of color and kind of the racism within the movement. Definitely will not be able to cover every single aspect of Me Too, but I will try my best to break down the movement and explore its impact on the feminist community. With all that being said, let's dive into the Me Too movement. So, I always do my fit checks in my videos. This is not one of my typical video essays because I'm not doing like literature focusing on media analysis. It's actually like analyzing like real life movements that have happened, but it's still feminism, so that's like a big part of my analysis skills. So my fit check today is inspired by iconic feminist icon Leia Organa from Star Wars. So here's my fit check. What we really need is a Feminiomenon. I've taken countless classes on feminism, from specific classes focusing on feminism in the US, to feminist issues, to classes focused on unpacking gender and sexuality, and classes focused on breaking down the patriarchy. My minor is Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies, and my major is English. So just for context, I feel like that gives an explanation of who I am as a person and just my interests, and also, yeah, just why I am the way that I am. I am no way an expert on feminism. Can anyone truly ever be an expert? There's always more to learn, which is kind of beautiful. But I do know what I am talking about when I discuss feminism. Doesn't mean that I don't learn new things every time I take a feminism class. And unfortunately, it wasn't until my senior year of high school when I learned Anita Hill's name. As Britannica outlines, Anita Hill is an American attorney and educator who garnered national attention for her testimony in the 1991 Senate confirmation hearings for U.S. Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas, whom she accused of sexual harassment.
Professor, do you swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Anita Hill earned a law degree from Yale University in 1980, and then she began to work at a law firm in D.C. However, she left that firm and went to work at the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights. Hill was a legal advisor to Assistant Secretary Clarence Thomas. It was during this time period that Thomas allegedly began to make unwanted sexual advances towards Hill. To note here that when I use the word allegedly, I am not trying to take away from the survivors' stories, but that for legal reasons, I have to use this word. I believe any survivors who come forward with stories about sexual assault, harassment, or rape. I also use the word survivor, not victim. That is a personal vocab choice I make. Victim has a lot of harmful stereotypes and things associated with it, and it kind of feels really heavy and just, icky sometimes for people. And survivor just feels more kind of like reclaiming and more powerful, so I'm going to use survivor. I understand that not everyone prefers survivor over victim, but just for me and for this video essay, I will be using the term survivor to talk about people who have survived sexual violence in any way. But yeah, going back to Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas would discuss sex in graphic detail and repeatedly tried to ask Hill out on dates, despite the fact that she repeatedly rejected him. Initial harassment stopped when Thomas was made the chair of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission in 1982. However, Hill alleged that the harassment did resume eventually. In 1983, Hill was so sick of the harassment that she left her position and began teaching. Then in 1991, U.S. President George H.W. Bush nominated Thomas to replace Thurgood Marshall in the Supreme Court. In October of that year, Hill testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee. She recounted Thomas's alleged sexual harassment.
What was the most embarrassing of all the incidences that you have alleged?
I think the one that was the most embarrassing was his discussion of pornography involving these women with large breasts.
The hearings, which were televised, created a media circus and propelled Hill into the spotlight. During her questioning, a number of senators accused her of lying and raised doubts about her sanity. Thomas later denied the allegations, accusing the committee of a high-tech lynching. Although other women reportedly could have supported Hill's testimony, they were never called by the committee. In the end, Thomas was narrowly confirmed, 52 to 48. Despite the fact that Thomas was confirmed, Hill's testimony motivated many women to want to get involved in politics. And Anita Hill is often credited with bringing awareness to sexual harassment in the workplace. Anita Hill's case is eerily similar to Dr. Christine Blasey Ford and...
What is the strongest memory you have? Strongest memory of the incident, something that you cannot forget. Take whatever time you need.
Indelible in the hippocampus is the laughter.
And unfortunately, neither one of these women got the justice they deserved. Though I do feel as if Dr. Ford is not discussed nearly as much as she should be in feminist academic spaces, I think Anita Hill is discussed far less than Dr. Ford. Although Anita Hill is not credited with founding the MeToo movement, I do think her testimony is important when discussing MeToo, because Hill was so revolutionary when it came to discussing sexual harassment in the workplace. I also wanted to highlight Anita Hill and her story because she is a woman of color, and also how similar her case is to Dr. Ford's. In October of 2021, Glenn Fawcett interviewed Anita Hill in the article, 30 years after her testimony, Anita Hill still wants something from Joe Biden. Fawcett asked Hill about how the confirmation of Clarence Thomas still impacts her 30 years later, and if his confirmation made Hill lose faith in the authority of the judicial system. And Hill mentions how disappointing it is that there are now 2 Supreme Court justices who have 3 hearings about sexual misconduct. One sexual assault allegation against Justice Kavanaugh, and then there were the Clarence Thomas hearings, which were focused on his behavior, which I would describe as sexual harassment. The question about the integrity of the court isn't just about me and Christine Blasey Ford, it's about the American public's confidence in the court. I think it's been diminished for a lot of people, including myself and including Christine Blasey Ford, but I don't want to speak for her. That there are 2 Supreme Court justices who have allegations of sexual harassment against them is extremely disheartening, and really shows how poorly survivors of sexual assault and harassment are treated by American society. In the article, Hill goes on to discuss the way that American society treats gender violence, and she specifically mentions Me Too. What is happening to our society? What is happening to individuals in elementary schools who are bullied and harassed and sexually harassed in numbers we don't even have a full accounting of? What's happening in colleges and universities? We're beginning to understand that very recently, with students protesting sexual assault in fraternities and asking for the closing of fraternities. And what's happening in our workplaces? There are examples over and over again. We have, of course, Me Too, which was driven in part by sexual misconduct of all sorts, rapes, sexual assault, and sexual extortion in Hollywood. But then, when it came down to it, the response was from women all throughout our society. 19 million tweets, the number of times the hashtag Me Too was used as of October 2018. As Anita Hill mentions, Me Too had a resurgence in 2017 because of sexual misconduct in Hollywood being exposed via tweets. However, the Me Too movement did not initially begin in 2017. I could go on and on about Anita Hill and her impact on the way that gender violence and sexual harassment in the workplace is viewed by American society, but as I have previously stated, we have a lot to cover in this video essay, but I do think it's important to highlight women of color and their experiences throughout this video essay, and I wanted to start with Anita Hill. The Me Too movement began way back in 2006, when I was 3 years old. The website MeToo Movement outlines the history of the Me Too movement and is also a really helpful tool, and I recommend, if you have the time, going and checking it out. It will be linked in my work Cited in the description box, and then also be at the very end of the video when I do all my sources. Outlines the history of the Me Too movement, along with providing a lot of other important information related to the movement and sexual violence. In the tab Get to Know Us on the website, they have a section that centers around their history and inception, and in this section they state, in 2006, the Me Too movement was founded by survivor and activist Tarana Burke. In those early years, we developed our vision to bring resources, support, and pathways to healing where none existed before, and we got to work building a community of advocates determined to interrupt sexual violence whenever it happens. This section goes on to discuss how in 2017, hashtag MeToo went viral. However, the website glosses over the fact that women co-opting hashtag MeToo and not crediting the original creator of the movement, which is something I'm going to dive into more later in this video essay. But first, I wanted to focus on the actual inception and creation of hashtag MeToo. I have previously stated the Me Too movement was founded by Tarana Burke, and Tarana outlines her reasoning for why she founded Me Too in the section titled Inception. Tarana tells a deeply personal story of hers about a young girl named Heaven that Tarana met at a youth camp who had sexual trauma. Tarana is a youth worker and was participating in an all-girls bonding session with young girls at this youth camp, and several of the girls shared deeply intimate stories during this session, and then when the session ended, Tarana and the other adults that were present reminded the girls that if any of them ever needed anything or needed a trusted adult to go to, that they were always there for them. The next night at the camp, Heaven asked to talk to Tarana. As Tarana states on the website, I knew Heaven as a sweet-faced little girl who clung to me throughout the camp. However, her hyperactive and often anger-filled behavior betrayed both her name and the light, high-pitched voice with which she spoke. I was always having to pull her out of some type of situation. As she attempted to talk to me that day, the look in her eyes told me this conversation would be anything but ordinary. She had a deep sadness and a yearning for confession that I read immediately, and I wanted no part of it. Tarana went on to kind of avoid Heaven, but Heaven finally caught Tarana and begged her to listen to her story, and Tarana finally agreed. For the next several minutes, this child, Heaven, in a halting voice, told me about her stepdaddy, rather her mother's boyfriend, who was doing all sorts of monstrous things to her developing body. I was horrified by her words, and the emotions welling inside of me ran the gamut. I listened until I literally could not take it anymore, which turned out to be less than 5 minutes. Right in the middle of Heaven sharing her pain with me, I cut off this little girl's story and directed her to another female counselor who I believed could help her better. Tarana details how after stopping Heaven in the middle of her story, Heaven gave Tarana this look that Tarana still can't forget to this day. This look still haunts her to this day, and Tarana says that she thinks about Heaven and this look all the time. The shock of being rejected, the pain of opening a wound only to have it abruptly forced shut again, it was all on that precious little face. But I wasn't ready to help. As much as I loved children and as much as I cared about that child, I did not yet possess her courage. As much as I loved her, I could not muster the energy to tell her that I understood, that I connected, and that I could feel her pain. I couldn't help her release her shame or impress upon her that none of it was her fault. But most of all, I did not find the strength to say out loud the words that were ringing in my head over and over again. I just watched her walk away from me, visibly struggling to recapture those secrets and tuck them back into their hiding place. I watched her put her mask back on her face and return to the world. And as I stood there, I couldn't even bring myself to whisper the words circling my mind and soul. Me too. I feel as if this is unfortunately a common experience for people who have experienced sexual trauma, and when others try to discuss/open up to them about their sexual trauma. Sometimes it can be so overwhelming and triggering for another survivor to hear someone else's story of sexual abuse that they instantly shut down and refuse to hear it. But even though it can be extremely triggering and upsetting, it is important to know that you are not alone in your experiences. The MeToo movement, as created by Tarana Burke, is focused on providing survivors a place to share their experiences and seek out help. A community is key to helping survivors feel safe. And as the MeToo Movement website states, when survivors channel their unique empathy and community with one another and in service of a future free from sexual violence, that's when change happens. The MeToo movement is also focused on ending sexual violence. As their mission statement states, MeToo International is a conveyor, thought leader, and organizer in the global movement to end sexual and gender-based violence, grounded in Black feminist principles and survivor-led healing and action. I think it's relevant to discuss the actual origins of the MeToo movement because the fact that the movement was founded by a Black woman is often glossed over in discussions of the impact of MeToo. I also think it's imperative to highlight the mission of the movement because I feel as if the actual mission of the movement is often lost whenever discussions of the MeToo movement occur.
Frustrated with all the sexual violence that I saw in my community, I pulled out a piece of paper and I wrote "Me Too" on the top of it. And I proceeded to write out an action plan for building a movement based on empathy between survivors.
Now that I have somewhat fully explained how the MeToo movement was founded by Tarana Burke, I think it's valuable to dive more into who Tarana Burke is. The MeToo website also features a section fully centered around Tarana Burke. As it states at the top of the section, Tarana J. Burke asserts that Me Too is more than just a moment in time. As founder of the Me Too movement, which began in 2006, and as someone who has been organizing within issues facing Black women and girls for more than 3 decades, Tarana has a commitment and vision that is bigger than any hashtag or viral moment. I believe that this statement is a direct call out to when the hashtag MeToo movement went viral in 2017, because it blew up so massively and has since then fallen off in terms of the hashtag. And it appears as just a viral moment. And this section on the website focused on Tarana Burke. The website dives into Burke's work to end sexual violence. Tarana Burke is from Bronx, New York, and love of community and organizing began in the 1980s. Burke joined a youth development organization called 21st Century. Burke then went on to launch initiatives focused on ending racial discrimination, housing inequality, and seeking economic justice. Burke also attended Alabama State University, which has historically been a Black institution. Her advocacy work has continued through college, and when Burke moved to Selma, Alabama, she focused more on supporting survivors of sexual violence. It was then that Tarana heard Heaven's story, which truly opened Tarana's eyes. Burke, as a survivor of sexual violence herself, was able to personally identify and relate to a lot of the young Black girls' stories that she was encountering. Burke then realized that way too many girls were suffering through similar abuse and that they needed access to resources and support. And as the section states, Tarana's theory of empowerment through empathy is changing the way the world thinks and talks about sexual violence, consent, and body autonomy. Tarana has used her platform to share her long-standing belief that healing is not a destination, but a journey. This philosophy has inspired millions of survivors who previously had to live in isolation to deal with the pain, shame, and trauma of their experiences. Burke is truly influential, and she has received many honors. However, in my opinion, Tarana Burke is overshadowed by the multiple white women who kind of took over the MeToo movement in 2017. That is why it is key that I highlight Tarana Burke and how she created the MeToo movement, because she doesn't get the credit that she deserves. Imagine it's 2017. Bodak Yellow by Cardi B is constantly playing on the radio. Riverdale was everything. Everyone was obsessed with fidget spinners. And unfortunately, Donald Trump's first term as president began. So many other iconic pop culture moments occurred in 2017, and chief among them was the Me Too movement. The essay, What About #US2? The Invisibility of Race in the #Me Too movement by Angela Onwuachi-Willig outlines the impact that the most recent wave of the #MeToo movement has had, along with analyzing how women of color, specifically Black women, have repeatedly been ignored in the movement. This essay highlights the unfortunate racial bias has occurred in the hashtag MeToo movement. Machi Willig starts with discussing how in 2017, hashtag MeToo went viral on Twitter. On October 15th, 2017, the hashtag MeToo movement exploded onto the popular media stage after actress Alyssa Milano asked Twitter users to write "Me Too" as a reply to her tweet, if they had been sexually harassed or assaulted. Milano's request brought on an avalanche of stories concerning sexual harassment. Combined, more than 12 million users of Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, and other social media platforms offered posts and reactions to Milano's hashtag MeToo challenge. Unfortunately, because Milano is the one who tweeted this out, she started to get credited for starting the MeToo movement. The inspiration for this tweet was the exposing of Harvey Weinstein's sexual harassment in Hollywood, as detailed in the article, hashtag MeToo, How a Hashtag Became a Rallying Cry Against Sexual Harassment by Nati Komani from The Guardian. It started with an expose detailing countless allegations against Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein. But soon, personal stories began pouring in from women in all industries across the world, and the hashtag MeToo became a rallying cry against sexual assault and harassment. The hashtag MeToo movement in 2017 all started off with Harvey Weinstein and Milano, who was one of Weinstein's top critics, but many other public figures joined in on the conversation, such as Reese Witherspoon, Jennifer Lawrence, America Ferrara, Lady Gaga, Gabrielle Union, Terry Crews, the woman of the USA Gymnastics, Anna Faris, and so many more. Countless other people who are not celebrities or public figures also participated in hashtag MeToo, and the movement grew beyond calling out just one man to calling out the way that society tells men that they can treat women. The hashtag MeToo movement going viral in 2017 started a lot of extremely pivotal conversations. However, among all the positive conversations that were brought up, there were also many critiques of the hashtag MeToo movement. Go back to Angela Onwachi Willig's essay, What About Hashtag Us Too? The Invisibility of Race in the Hashtag MeToo Movement. Onwachi Willig discusses the discourse that arose because of the hashtag MeToo movement going viral. Along with millions of affirming responses to Milano's tweet, there were also critiques of her request, namely from women of color who were upset that, yet again, a white woman was receiving credit for an idea originated by a woman of color. Their response to Milano's call for Me Too tweets, these women highlighted not only that the phrase Me Too was originally coined by a black woman, Tarana Burke, more than 10 years prior, but also that Burke had never received anywhere near the same level of support that white feminists like Milano received from the general public. Unfortunately, this kind of discrepancy has been a common occurrence in the feminist movement in the US.
That it's something that is so prevalent. It is a cultural issue that I think that we have to face. And women posting Me Too, I think, gave them the courage to not have to tell their story or not have to name their predator, but to just stand in solidarity.
Before discussing the racism that was unfortunately heavily propagated in the 2017 boom of hashtag MeToo, I think it's important to discuss the woman whose tweet blew up the movement. Alyssa Milano is an actress known for her roles in Who's the Boss, Melrose Place, Charmed, and so much more. Milano started acting at a very young age and has been in the spotlight for the majority of her life. In 2017, Milano tweeted out, "If all the women who have been sexually harassed or assaulted wrote Me Too as a status, we might give people a sense of the magnitude of the problem." Which, as I have previously mentioned, went extremely viral and resulted in thousands of survivors coming forward. However, I think it's important to point out that Alyssa Milano is a white woman, and in her original tweet, she did not acknowledge the actual creator of hashtag MeToo, Tarana Burke, who is a black woman. Burke created Me Too in 2006, and almost a decade later in 2017, a white woman is being credited with creating this movement. Racism has unfortunately been a lingering feature of the feminist movement in the US since the suffragette era. This is a pattern of white women fighting and advocating for their rights and neglecting the rights of other women, specifically women of color, but also queer women and just any kind of marginalized woman. Angela Onwachi Willig brings this up in her essay. The recent resurgence of the hashtag MeToo movement reflects the long-standing marginalization and exclusion that women of color experience within the larger feminist movement in U.S. society. The way that Milano was given all the credit for the hashtag MeToo movement, despite the fact that Tarana Burke, a black woman, was the one who literally created the movement, is a perfect example of this. And as Onwachi Willig states, women of color are more vulnerable to sexual harassment than white women. Despite all these factors, the voices of women of color are often neglected and ignored within feminist spaces, specifically within the realm of the #MeToo movement. This is why intersectionality is so important when it comes to feminism. Intersectionality, as defined by Merriam-Webster, is the complex way in which the effects of multiple forms of discrimination, such as racism, sexism, and classism, combine, overlap, or intersect, especially in the experiences of marginalized individuals or groups. Intersectional feminism tries to highlight all people and their experiences and their voices, as opposed to just highlighting a certain group of people. Unfortunately, intersectional feminism did not seem to be important to the #MeToo movement in 2017, which caused many women of color's voices to go unheard. I think also the way that a white woman co-opted a movement that was originally founded by a black woman also contributes to #MeToo not being intersectional. Ashwini Tambi explores the underlying racism within the #MeToo movement in the article Reckoning with the Silences of #MeToo. Tambi explores why the #MeToo movement blew up and how Trump being president during the time of the #MeToo movement resurgence in 2017 may have caused the movement to go so viral. Tambi also mentions how when the movement was blowing up, she was aware of the potential race and class politics that may play into the #MeToo movement. From the inception of #MeToo, I have also watched its racial and class politics with some wariness. Whose pain was being centered? I wondered. A colleague recently asked out loud, is #MeToo a white woman's movement? Or wondered, is this a moral panic? Unfortunately, when #MeToo blew up in 2017, white women's pain was the center feature of the movement, and then the discussions that occurred surrounding the movement. Angela Onwachi Willig comments on how women of color's experiences are often ignored or overlooked by white women. Specifically, some women, particularly white women, within the feminist movement still barely acknowledge or understand the unique, racialized, and gendered harassment experiences that women of color face. Because unfortunately there is rampant racism within the #MeToo movement and the feminist movement, there has been plenty of criticism of the #MeToo movement.
I'd be a fearless leader. I'd be an alpha.
The impact of #MeToo is significant and important, and I do want to highlight how impactful this movement has been. And I am specifically referring to the 2017 wave of the movement right now. #MeToo has given survivors a voice and made survivors more visible than they have been in the past. However, despite the positive impact this movement has made, the negative aspects of the movement should not be ignored. In the essay, The Politics for Survivors of Sexual Violence, a critique of the #MeToo movement by Erin Brown explores the criticisms that the #MeToo movement has received. Brown also specifically calls out the movement and how it seemingly mainly highlights the voices of white women survivors and has pushed women of color who are also survivors to the wayside. Just because the #MeToo existed did not mean that all survivors were visible. Marginalized survivors still struggled to be visible. The #MeToo also became a contested movement over its politics of visibility. Even though #MeToo was founded by a woman of color, Tarana Burke, it is extremely upsetting to see that it took a famous white woman co-opting the movement for it to get traction in the media and to go viral. And unfortunately, because of this co-opting of the movement, Alyssa Milano often gets credited with creating MeToo. There are also a lot of tweets that are from women of color calling out MeToo and saying, our voices are not being heard. All we're seeing is white women out here sharing their stories, and our stories are continuing to go ignored. When MeToo went viral in 2017, it was full of racism and white women co-opting a movement that was originated by a woman of color. So where do we go from here? How can we hold space for acknowledging how important the #MeToo movement has been for survivors, while also acknowledging how unfortunately women of color's voices have been silenced by the movement? I think it's important to acknowledge that #MeToo was originally founded by a woman of color, and Tarana Burke should be credited for her work. Yes, Alyssa Milano brought attention to the #MeToo movement by tweeting about it, which I do think is important, but I also think it's important to give credit when credit is due. Feminism in general should aim to be more intersectional, but so should #MeToo. #MeToo wasn't just a hashtag or a viral moment or a trend. It's an important movement that highlights the voices of those that are often ignored or neglected.
What we do with this thing that we're all holding is the evidence that this is bigger than a moment. It's the confirmation that we are in a movement.
MeToo Movement states, in 2017, survivors' voices erupted a movement, forcing our country to grapple with its ever-present rape culture problem. Since the world-shifting moment, we have created spaces for people to tell their truths, have difficult conversations, and for survivors to find community. We've moved #beyond the hashtag to amplifying the work being done to disrupt rape culture. Me Too International was founded to carry forth the charge of radical community healing and action. The vision, asserting that the transformation of oppressive systems, narratives, and cultures grounded in survivors' lived experiences and leadership, fosters creative solutions, practices, and relationships. A world free of sexual violence awaits us all. #beyond the hashtag takes action to disrupt rape culture today. Intersectionality is important because it uplifts the voices of all people, and I think in movements like feminism and #MeToo, intersectionality is key to making sure that every person is visible and is able to have their voices heard. Unfortunately, when #MeToo went viral in 2017, women of color's voices and stories were ignored, along with the women who founded the movement. However, I hope that moving forward, the voices that were ignored can be uplifted, and those who originally founded movements will be credited for their work. Intersectionality is so important to me, and I am forever grateful for all the work that feminist women of color have done for the feminist movement. Without feminist women of color, we wouldn't have the #MeToo movement, and I truly believe that in 2025, people should be credited for their work. And I'm very grateful for all of the work that Tarana Burke has done and every other woman of color who has been a part of #MeToo or just, again, the broader feminist movement. We should be uplifting one another and listening to each other and our lived experiences, because that is how we make change and that is how we do good. Really grateful for Me Too, the movement started by Tarana Burke, because it platforms people whose autonomy has been stripped away because of sexual violence, and it gives them a voice and gives them a safe space and makes them feel heard. And I think that is really, really important. As a white woman who is an intersectional feminist, I feel that it is my duty to platform and uplift the voices of others who unfortunately have traditionally been ignored, so that we can work towards a future in which somehow we can exist without being marginalized and subjected to harm and violence and all of that. And I think when looking back on the viral moment that #MeToo had in 2017, it is important to acknowledge who actually founded the movement. I'm sick and tired of women of color and their accomplishments being neglected, and Tarana Burke should be given the credit for #MeToo. Thank you so much for watching this video essay. I really hope you learned about the impact of the #MeToo movement and who actually created the movement. I learned a lot of awesome things when researching this, and I hope you did as well. And thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.
But then I spent so many nights thinking how you did me wrong, and I grew strong, and I learned how